piece of media talking about this event as if anyone had ever heard of it before. This one uses a die.
We are now at a stage that you might find yourself in. And what I mean is, all the machine work is done. So in theory, let's say you got that all finished, mailed back to you, it's time to reassemble. I encourage a lot of people to do this when I talk to them on the phone. Assembly is tedious, and even with what I'm going to consider this assembly, it's not going to be 100% complete. There's going to be a bunch of small little detail things that will be left to the owner. But I'm going to at least get the important parts done, and that's what we're going to do in the video. So I want to kind of just show the ease of assembly. It's just a matter of doing it in the right order and approaching it correctly. But all of the bits that you can't do at home, like the crank grind, and then I went ahead and assembled it. Cylinders are bored and head is rebuilt. The first thing I would always suggest is taking your case halves and matching them up. You know, I disassembled this engine. I know they came apart, but maybe you got a basket case or something. It's important to make sure that you have nothing stopping you from assembling once we get all these other components in. So obviously a visual inspection of the gasket surface, you would have done that when you were cleaning it up, making sure there's no gouges or high spots or anything that's a red flag. And then we've got our hollow dowel here and our solid little pin here, and we're going to line those two things up and just make sure that this wants to sit together, which thankfully it does. Go around, make sure everything's looking good. I'm happy with that. So, cool. Step one's complete. That was easy enough. The next one would be, again, after it's passed visual inspection from you scrubbing and cleaning and inspecting all of the threads. I did a thread repair on both of these two 1/4-20 holes, cleaned everything else up, inspected everything, and then I ran a tap down every single one of these holes to make sure it was clean and free of anything. It was very, very compacted with shit. So thankfully we got that cleaned out. And then I also made sure that all the oil passages are super, super clean and there's nothing hiding. You want to make sure that, you know, even if you didn't blast it, you still want to make sure that there's nothing, no debris or anything that's going to surprise you later on. So it's super important to make sure that every little nook and cranny has been checked. Now that we know we can get our bottom end assembled because everything is looking good, you need to warm up the aluminum to accept the main bearings. You do not need to freeze the main bearing. It's not going to make enough of a difference. It's just don't mess around with that. It's stupid. Propane works great, and I'm not going to say acetylene because you do have to be really careful with that, but you could if you were really, knew what you were doing. I have my little oven, so that way I don't have to stand here with a torch and watch it. So I'm going to go stick these in the oven, get them warm, and then we will drop those bearings in. So I will be right back. While we wait for those case halves to warm up, I just kind of wanted to emphasize how much easier it is to do a good assembly when you have everything laid out. So that way you know you've got all of your pieces and parts that you're going to need, and then you don't have any real surprises. Another thing you might notice is this engine is kind of iffy on right and wrong and finish and quality. This is a little bit of a quick and dirty, kind of make it look half-assed pretty, not super important. It's a survivor chopper, so the guy was really just wanting it to run well and wasn't super concerned with aesthetics. So if you hear it ring like that, that's how you know you're nice and seated. If you wanted, you could check it. But I can definitely hear that it is seated, so no worries there. We're gonna let that cool, and then obviously we need to drop in the next one. I was discussing this video with Dan just the other day and wanted to see if there was anything he wanted, added or any input or anything like that. And something I haven't done, and I really liked his idea, is installing the cam gears before putting the case halves together. And I thought that was a really, really good idea. And so we're going to do this one in that order. But what you want to do before, while you got your hands free and everything, is make sure your new cam keys are going to fit. There's nothing worse than going to try and like fiddle with it and them not wanting to go in. I can tell these are on the tight side, which is awesome, but they do want to start. So that's super cool. And then you also want to make sure it's going to fit in the slot on the... Oh yeah, those are both perfect. And we'll check to make sure it's going to fit in here. Beautiful. Okay, cool. So once you know they're all going to fit where they need to, you can proceed. But if for any reason a key you got doesn't want to fit, if you have a really nice wide file, you could carefully remove some material. Otherwise, like 1000 grit sandpaper and just do the surfacing trick. Just finesse it until it wants to go. You don't have to go super crazy, but yeah, just making sure that they all have a good, nice, solid fit is important to do now while you can still work it. That's what you want to hear. All right, well, we're going to give our newfangled way of assembling this a little demo here. So you can use, I like these rubber soft jaws. 2 nice little pieces of wood would work the same, but you're going to hold that lobe so it's going to prevent this cam from being able to rotate while we're doing all of our work. So we're going to put that here, and then we're going to put a little bit of our assembly lube around that, and then if you want, maybe you could even put some in the bushing. And then we're going to set that over. So now that's just going to hang out there. Now, what you should do before, I got done doing this, but you always want to test fit your installation tool to make sure it's going to thread onto your cams nicely. If you do not have this installation tool, I don't know how you got your engine apart because you were supposed to get it to disassemble. So, if you have not ordered it yet, do it now. But we already made sure our cam key works. We already made sure our threads are good on both the cam gear and the end of the cam. So we're going to set that key in place and then get our handy dandy channel locks out and get it kind of seated where it needs to be. Now you're going to thread on installation tool, keyway, the key. Now pre-units only have the one keyway, so you can't get confused like on a later unit one. And then I like to just kind of, we're already there, but if you came down and you missed it, it usually should kind of drop into place and you can feel that you've engaged that key. And once you've got it kind of squared up, you can get your nut on. And because you're holding the cam and the vise, you don't have to hold the tool or anything. It's just going to stay nice and snug for you, and you can bottom it out. Cool. Man, that was way slick. That was considerably easier than wrestling it after the fact. So definitely recommend that assembly order. That was easy. So now we're just going to repeat the process on the other side. Alright, now we'll get that key in there, seat it. Man, this is just so much smoother. Props to Dan on this idea. Now at this point it's not necessary to put the nuts on. I'm going to go ahead and leave those off. But now this is just going to make it a lot easier to do our next step of assembly, because you're not having to fiddle with anything. So that was nice. I like that a lot. Alright, so now we're ready to proceed with the next step. Before we have something poking out of this hole, we need to put on our new seal. You should use a bearing and seal driver. Maybe you don't have one. You can improvise if you have a little bit of finesse with your hands. Maybe you have a Mack truck wrist pin laying around. That would work good. We have more than enough coverage, so we don't have to worry about, creasing an edge or anything like that. And the weight will kind of keep it from bouncing around too much. So once you kind of inspect it, make sure everything's looking good, make sure you've got your spring in the back. It didn't fall out when you ordered it or anything like that. We're going to set this kind of squared up, maybe get a little bit of tension on it. And we're just going to okay. Get myself back flat again. And now, you may have noticed earlier when this was hot, a decent amount of oil came out from these bushings. That's normal. You're going to see it when you add heat into anything like that. If you do localized heat and only warm up the bearing area, it may not be as bad. But because I heated up the whole case, it was much more prevalent. But just something that you don't need to panic about. It's pretty normal. So at this point, I want to check my breather disc. If you replace this with a new one, there's a chance you're going to have to clean up the edges. They have a pretty nice razor edge from manufacturing, so definitely something you want to check out. But this is the original one. It's still in good shape, so I'm going to get it in the bottom. And I'm going to make sure that it spins freely. These things are really hard, and so if they're not properly, if they're not aligned properly, you'll notice that they will fight you pretty good. So if you can spin it nice and freely like this, then you know you're good to go. Now that we know that that's in the bottom and it spins freely, we will throw a little bit more assembly lube on because everything needs it. So we'll put a little bit down in there. And then we'll go ahead and just toss the spring in. And make sure it is seated and not in the way or hung up on anything. Okay, cool. Spring's in, breather disc is in. You don't want to forget those things. They're very important. I also threw a little bit of lube in the bearing. I don't know if I showed that. So now, essentially, we're ready to drop in the crank. So, protecting your rods, you're going to grab your crank and set it down in. And we are seated, so we're good to go there. Now, I'm going to put 3-bond, I'm going to use Blue Hylam on this. You can use 1184 3-bond or Hylamar product on these surfaces. One of the cool things about Hylamar's product is it's non-setting. So that means even if I get this all laid out and didn't get back to it until tomorrow, it would still seal up, which is pretty cool. You don't have to get carried away with this stuff. You're really just hoping to fill in any small voids, if there was any. You can actually cause problems by adding too much, and so you want to avoid that. So I like to just get it started and then really get it distributed. So now we know we've got our little disc in there, we've got our spring in there, everything's working the way it should, we've got our layer of sealant. So we should be a smooth little sailing on getting the other half on. I'm going to go ahead and throw some lubricant in that bearing and just double down on these cams. You can never have too much. So now the nice thing is these cams aren't going anywhere, and as I set the intake down in with the breather, I can actually spin it and make sure it's engaged. Oh. Nope, I think it just fell. Yeah. Okay, cool. So that's nice and smooth, so I know we're not bound up or we're caught. It's aligned properly. Both cams are spinning freely. Cool, so now we can throw some hardware in. I am going to put the 2 top screws in. They were in there when I got it. I just like to put them back in. You don't have to. A lot of people leave them out, but I'm going to install them. So I'm going to stand this up and we can get a couple pieces of hardware in. Okay, so I got that bolt back here and the stud down here. I already got one in, but I actually, so normally you've got this flat blade style screw, and that's why a lot of people don't want to put them back in, is because they're junk. I actually use the like Norton rocker spindle inspection cover deal, little cap. Andover Norton sells these stainless steel Allen ones, and they fit perfectly. So I like those because you can actually use a right angle drive, 90-degree drive, to put them in. So it works really good. Either way, I like to use these because you can actually get some tension on them over like the flat style ones, and they fit nicely. I tried a lot of different hardware, like hoping I could try and make something else fit, and I was always running into problems with clearancing the cylinder, but these work great. So this is definitely something you want to look for when you're kind of getting it back together, is if your case halves are snugged up and everything is just this smooth and fluid, you're doing good. So if you had any binding, something's wrong and you'd want to address it. But man, I can never get tired of looking at that baked paint. It just looks so much nicer, especially in this light. But it's duple color, high temp. This is the gloss, the high gloss or whatever, and then baked at 200 degrees for, I don't know, like 30 minutes or something like that. But way more durable this way and just looks nicer. If your machine shop did a good job, they would have soapy watered these and got all the hone oil and grit and everything out of them, and then wipe down the bore with engine oil. When you get it, do the same. If you want to do the soapy water, you can. I don't. On my personal cylinders, I do. Soapy water is not necessary, but I do always suggest to wipe down the bore with some engine oil right before you assemble it. That way, if it got any other contaminants in it, or if I didn't do a good enough job the 2 times I do it, you'll catch anything they got left behind or any dust that accumulated while you're waiting to do your project. So, and then also 2 of your studs have these locator dowels. There is a fatter hole. That one and that one are larger than the rest. So make sure that you have your dowels on the studs. I don't even know if, yeah, you can, you can't see them, but they're over here. So now you want to source some type of something you can lay across the surface for the skirt of our piston to rest against. So we're going to take one of the clips and our pliers and try to make it so you can see. I take it and I go on the opposite side of my thumb, and then I use my thumb to kind of like guide it in, and then as you rotate it, it should snap in. So pretty easy way of going about it. Get some lubricant in your small ends. You can use engine oil too if you're going to be running this thing soon. I got to ship this all the way back to Florida, and I don't know when they're going to start it, so I'm playing it safe with the sticky stuff. So now I've got my clip on the inside because it's easier to work on the outside one, obviously. You're just going to run that through, gently set it there, and repeat the process. Now the clip, at this point, take some time and stuff as many rags as you can get around this, because you do not want to try and chase this clip out of the bottom end. Luckily, a pre-unit has a pretty large sump, so God forbid something fell down in there, you could probably get it back out. But just be responsible and get yourself set up. So now with these are just pilots, but with whatever you decided to use as your holders, you're going to rotate the engine down and rest the skirts of the pistons against them, so they're nice and square and supported. Now we can stagger our rings. You want to do them 180 degrees, or yeah, 180, 270, 360. Yeah. If you just don't want all of your end gaps to be lined up, because that's going to allow blow by. So stagger them appropriately. I like to make a match just so then that way it's repeating, consistent, blah, blah, blah. Now would be a good time to get some oil on the rings. Actually, it's probably a good idea to do that prior to staggering them, because you're probably going to move them when you oil them, but you know. I'm still getting this figured out on how to communicate these steps, how to verbalize all this instead of just mindlessly doing it silent. You don't need to go crazy, you just need a good film. You just don't want the rings to be dry. Okay, now we're going to put our ring compressors on. I've gone back and forth on the idea of like having all the part numbers so I could recite them as I go, and I don't think that that's very responsible, because one, you might be working on something just slightly different enough that it could get us both in trouble. And two, I really want people to get good at reading parts books and sourcing their parts, because I think it's really helpful when it comes to like understanding and figuring things out. The more you stare at that parts book, the more you're going to kind of understand where things go and where they come from. And, you know, you might find something you didn't even realize you were missing or needed. So it's kind of been a reason for me to avoid naming off all the parts and part numbers to go with it. If you don't have a physical copy of a parts book, you can buy reprints, but if you don't have one, Baxter does have digital books on their website, so you can like do it on your phone or whatever. So you just click the make and model and whatever and year, and so you can get actual factory parts diagrams to look at, and they're pretty helpful. They're not all perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they're definitely helpful, and so I really encourage people to use those and get familiar with them. Also, the same thing goes with the factory workshop manuals. They're available and they're incredibly helpful. They don't have all the answers. I don't really follow them to a T. It just certain things I do, but I have my own way of doing stuff too. But per unit books aren't the best. I can definitely admit that. But yeah, you do need to know how to read a parts book and be able to figure out, you know, what you need. But things I don't reuse, I never reuse bearings. If you're already in there, you're doing it, just replace them. I try not to really reuse oil pumps. Those are worth changing 99% of the time. So we're going to drop these on, and something I've said in the past, I don't know if these pertain to this or not, but you kind of want to double check to make sure. Before you get the cylinder fully seated, you want to make sure your hardware is going to fit. I think it's a couple different Nortons and a couple different BSAs, and I don't know, there's just various ones where you get those cylinders all the way down and then you go to put the hardware in and it sometimes won't fit. So I will get really, really close and then start fitting all the hardware, and that way you kind of give yourself a chance to get them all in before it's fully seated. So pistons are rigid where they're going to be. Our ring compressors are just enough tension to slip, but they're going to, you know, get as much squeeze on those rings as we need. And we've got oil on the rings. We got a wipe down in the bore, and we're ready to slide it on. Make sure you guys can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to kind of just eyeball and look down. Everything looks pretty centered. These are floating on the wrist pin, so they may need to be kind of moved around a little bit. And once you know you've got a good center, you can kind of start bouncing them, and it should just drop like that very nicely. You shouldn't be, you know, I've seen guys use rubber mallets, and it's just that something's wrong if you have to use any type of force like that. You know, just the meat of your palm should be enough to get these things on. So I'm going to get the ring compressors out of the way. Sometimes, again, depending on, you know, I don't know why you'd be watching this video on how to put together a pre-unit if you're putting something else together, but let's say you also have a Norton. Sometimes you need a friend. It definitely helps to have a buddy. Some of those cylinders weigh like 30 pounds, and they're not fun to play with by yourself. So maybe ask your girlfriend or your wife or your buddy to come give you a hand. But Triumphs are nice and light. They're pretty easy. The other thing I don't think I mentioned was always put an O-ring around my cam followers to make sure they don't fall down while I'm trying to fit these. The less stuff you got to worry about, the better. But just a little O-ring does a good job. I actually think these are they're an old set for like rocker spindles or something, but I just always have a set laying around for this. Okay, stop right there. Let it chill for a second. Shit, I don't know when that happened. Well, we're fitting the base nuts on. I don't know how much of that I had to cut out from that gimbal going limp on me. Okay, so I'm already running into this one here is already kind of fighting me, so I'm going to lift up and get that one started there. This one. Yep. Yeah, so these do touch. So I'm going to go ahead and just get them all on with it lifted slightly. All right. I'm going to go ahead and get all these kind of snugged up. We won't torque them yet. Okay, so I've already kind of started a few of these. I'm not going to show it to you because I'm struggling. I'm using my torque adapter. You have to get creative when you're doing base nuts, especially when you're doing something like this. I've got like what I prefer, the closed end wrench that I've modified, whether it's the British ones or like this one, a 1/2 inch actually fits really well on these acorns. But it's an acorn, so that means I can't get in on the top. You know, I'd have to shave this down to where it was useless, which means I'm using the open end of a decent sized wrench, which any of you have done this know that you can only go so far with a decent sized head on a wrench. So like I'm struggling. I'm getting there, but it looks sloppy, and I'm not going to show you, so it's more or less embarrassing. But yeah, just like this one, for example, you can't use the open end because I've modified this one so bad. It just flares open every time you get any sort of torque on it. I'm not even going to address timing. Use your book. We're not going to degree cams in a video. It's too difficult to try and make palatable. So that's all we're going to say about that. The next conversation I don't want to have with you is push rods and push rod seals and squish and all this other bullshit that I just get very frustrated with because there's really no easy answer. I don't even know how to get into it. When I disassembled this engine, the stack of seals that they had, which I'm assuming they were fighting a leak, but they had stacked up so many seals that the center of this was so black and blown out. I mean, that head gasket had been blown and was blown. And then you can come to the top side and see how many times they tried crushing the head bolts down, thinking that they were going to eventually seal it. But their problem was their stack height was way too tall, and they were actually bowing the head. They were never going to get it flat, and they actually blew out these top lips. These were completely mashed all the way down because they had just so much. And again, I think it was probably them chasing a leak, thinking that, oh, more seals the better, but that's not necessarily the case. It's a delicate balance between too much and not enough. You want pressure on the O-rings to create a seal, but you don't want so much pressure that you're splitting or pushing out the seal or warping your head. So it's a balance. That's all I can say. That's the easiest answer. There is no right or wrong stack of components because I don't know what you have. I actually had to correct one of the tappet blocks because they had some weird random tappet block installed, which I'm sure was not helping with their sealing problem. But you need tappet blocks to match the head and then the correct pushrod tube to go along with those components. If you have the wrong year tappet block with the wrong year pushrod with the wrong year head, you're never going to have a good seal or even have fitted components. So it's important to figure out what you've got and use the right thing. So I am now going to try my first setup. I did do a dry fit, put the head on with the pushrod tubes with nothing in there, and there is a pretty good gap. So that kind of tells me that we can have a decent amount of seal in here. So we're going to know pretty quickly if this is too much. Once we set our head on, I like the way this is looking in the front, but our back is sitting a bit high. That bottom is just too thick, and it is going to give us fit. So we're going to start over and try something on the thinner side on that bottom. Having the black ones at the base were too thick, and so you don't have a ton of options. There's like these clear ones, there's O-rings, there's all these different options. We had the white ones at the top, And so just looking, I think I'm going to go ahead and try and put 2 more white ones at the bottom and see what that gives us for stack height. Again, if our head touches the head gasket before it seats down the pushrod tubes, and we're still going to be in trouble. We are going to have to keep kind of problem solving, but I'm going to give these a try and see if it's enough. Squish it like that. I think that might be... I think that's going to be enough. There's a decent gap. I could get a feeler gauge in there and tell you what it is, but I think that's going to be a good enough amount of pressure. But I am going to double down on making sure I've got enough Hylamar on those. Got my washers on so I don't cause any damage. Now when you do these first outer 4, you don't want to get like super crazy carried away. Just because until you get the inner 4 on, you're not really wanting to twist or warp the head or anything like that, but you can get it seated without hurting anything. So realistically, by this point, you needed the cam tool and some ring compressors. Other than that, it's been pretty well just standard tools. So, I mean, getting these back together really isn't that bad. You just have to approach it in a, intelligent fashion, I guess, with patience and finesse. Maybe those are the words I want to use. But we're going to get these rocker boxes on, I think, next. All right, we're going to get these push rods down in to their home. These are the original ones. They all checked out good. First thing, it would just be visual inspection, like always. Make sure they're straight. Also, make sure they're all the same length. I've seen quite a few sets where you pull out and all of them are different lengths, or one is short, whatever the situation might be. Just double check that you've got 4 matching ones. All of the ends are still nice and snug. We've talked about this before, but I have my old rinky-dink drop test. It's just a good way to tell that you don't have a dead one, meaning if one of the ends was loose, it would just thud when it hit the ground. If they're good, they ring. Once you know you've got all 4 good push rods, you're going to fill your ends with some assembly lube or oil, anything that's going to kind of give you that vacuum to the cam follower. And that's going to help kind of prevent them from bouncing off during assembly. I can't tell you how many times people have chased their tail because one of the push rods fell off. At this point, it's easiest, like right now, we've got our intake side, our level, so we're going to just go ahead and leave that. We're going to grab our intake rocker box. You can tell it's the intake rocker box because of what side your spindle is sticking out. Can you guys see what I'm doing? If the spindle is sticking out, you want that to be on the right side of the bike if you're riding it. So this is our right side of our engine, timing side. That's the side we're going to have that spindle sticking out. That makes this an intake. So I'm going to take our trimmed up. It has these 2 locator holes for the push rod, so it actually can be a little bit easier to stick it on this side first, and then I like to take both rockers and lift them all the way up, holding them there, and then kind of guide those front studs in, and then you're going to come down. Actually, no, on this we're going to do it the other way. I take that back. We're going to start with the rockers into the push rods and then rock forward on this one. So we're going to set both of those in, and then we're going to come down and fall into place. Ooh. The whole time you want to make sure your rockers are still on those push rods, and then at this point I like to run any slack out to keep them from falling off. Okay, so we're still on the push rods. Everything is where it's supposed to be, and so we're going to stick our head bolts in. Get them past that gasket. All this hardware had to get replaced because none of it was right. It was all mismatched and it was a complete mess. Actually, the rocker box corner, the quarter 20 ones, well, quarter 26 on this, but they made it out of this cool chunk of all thread and an acorn, so that was kind of super cool and awesome custom work there. Custom with a K. And then we're just going to repeat the same thing on the other side. I do want to get all of this hardware snugged up before I rotate the engine at all to get my push rods level like we did on this side. But right now there's really no like actual pressure on the springs yet. So I want to kind of get everything bottomed out, and then we aren't stressing anything with rotating. Alright, so now that we've got all that snugged up, we'll jump over here and do this side. Both rocker boxes are on, so now I'm going to torque the head bolt, and then we'll snug up the last bit of the 3/16 smaller hardware. The torque rating on these is 18 foot-pounds, so I'm about halfway all the way around, and then finish it off. You always start in the center, doing crisscross pattern. Now, if you remember, I did the helicoils in these four, so I'm going to be able to definitely do better than I could before, but you don't want to rip these out, and they don't do much other than keep the oil from escaping. These don't have a ton of responsibility for, you know, holding the rocker box down. So a lot of guys smoke these things and it rips the threads out, so it really doesn't need to be that crazy tight. You just want to snug it up and keep it oil tight, and the same goes for these. I've seen guys just go bananas on it and pull the stud out of the rocker box, and you don't want to do that. So again, it doesn't take much. You just want to get them snugged down and prevent any oil from escaping. So now that we've done that, I can go through and set the valve lash. I think one of the last things we're going to do together is get this Morgul pump on. Cheap insurance, I've talked about this all the time. It's just one of those deals where you've just spent all this time and money. I know Morgul pumps are not cheap, and fortunately Hepalite just started manufacturing a replacement pump for pre-units also, so it does give you some options, but a new pump is just worth it. Don't buy the other, I don't even know what to call it because I don't know what name it would be under, but there's another pump available out there, and they are no good. They're full of trash. When you get them, they have bad tolerances, so don't get those. They're not worth it. Morgo or Hepalite is the only pump I recommend. If you want to go with the original pump, that's fine. Just really, really inspect it, double check it, and make sure you feel very, very confident in it. And that goes to say you should inspect any new pump. Even brand new out of the package, I would definitely check it and inspect it and make sure everything is looking good. And then prime it a little bit with some engine oil or assembly lube, and then that way you know it will be ready to go when this thing first fires up. Obviously gasket goes on dry, and then I also recommend new hardware. They have the little serrated washer that goes on these, and obviously 2 little nuts. The torque setting on those is 5 foot-pounds. Pretty light torque, but you don't want to over tighten it because it will bind the body and the pumps and warp it and stuff. So it's important that you use the proper torque setting on those. All right. Well, I've got all of the, well, I would have had to have done that prior to the pump, but I didn't mention it. All the cam nuts and crank pinion nuts are tightened down. We did the base gasket together, we did the head together, we did the rocker boxes together. So this gets you far enough. I left out a ton of information, but I'm just going to have to keep doing these because I'm never going to be able to cover everything in detail every single video. So I'm just trying to do little bits here and there. Once you guys have consumed enough of these videos, then I feel like it will be something that becomes less intimidating. How about that? But yes, get your books, do your research. Hell, watch as many other people talk about this stuff as you can. You know, don't just rely on what you're seeing here, but I'm just hoping that if I show you over and over and over, it just becomes more and more second nature to you. But let's just look to see. Again, these, I'm not proud of these polish jobs. This is not, you know, this is why I don't do them. I don't like doing half-ass polishing, but for this being in the condition that it was in, I had to do something. So I got all the chrome off, and then I just gave it the quickest polish job I could. Same with the rocker boxes. Those were replacement ones because I couldn't even get the old ones cleaned up enough. But I just did the fastest polish I've ever done. I enjoy polishing when it's my own stuff because I will spend like 6 hours on it. But that's why I don't do other people's, because you can't charge accordingly. It's just not fair. So yeah, that's my excuse for not polishing. I've had people in the past beg me to do it, you know, insist that I do it, and I charged them for it, and it sucked, you know, filling out that bill, but they wanted it, so I got gnarly fingerprints on this thing. But he wants a new pressure relief valve, so I'm going to get one of those in it too, but I'm waiting on the magneto, so that's why we're ending here. Again, there's a lot of little odds and ends that aren't done. If you got something out of this, that is super cool and awesome. I'm glad. If you have any questions or comments, you know, anything helps guide the next video to make it more worth watching.
I mean, why would they want this? Suez